Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah. All praise is due to Allah, and may Allah's peace and blessings be on the last Prophet of Allah. As we mentioned previously, Tawheed has to be looked at as a whole. As we study it now in bits and pieces, this is only to better understand the whole. We looked at Tawheed al-Rububiyyah, and we looked at Tawheed al-Asma wa Sifat, and now we'll be looking at Tawheed al-Ibadah, or Tawheed al-Uluhiyyah, or al-Ilahiyyah, a variety of different names given to it. But, as we said, though we look at it in parts, we have to keep in mind the whole. And what you will find is that there will be an overlapping between Tawheed al-Rububiyyah, Tawheed al-Asma wa Sifat, as well as ultimately Tawheed al-Ibadah. There is an overlapping because they are part of one organic whole. So you have to keep that whole in mind. We said that Tawheed al-Rububiyyah was natural for every human being to know within himself. Whether he implements the consequences of that knowledge in his life will depend on his personal choices, or depend on her environment. The environment that is around a person can shape and affect the way they're able to realize the knowledge of Tawheed al-Rububiyyah which they have naturally within themselves. Knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in terms of His Asma wa Sifat, this had to come to us through the messengers of Allah. They are not things that a person can sit down and conclude. Some elements, yes, that the Creator has to be without beginning, otherwise He becomes like His creation. Philosophers have philosophized and come to that conclusion. Other attributes like His own eternal nature, that He wouldn't die, again, it makes sense, it is logical. So some of them we can come to conclusions about. But then there are others which we wouldn't necessarily conclude automatically. Some people might come to them, others might not. So in general, knowledge of Allah in terms of His names and attributes, this has come to us through the medium of the messengers. The messengers conveyed to us knowledge of who Allah is. So first and foremost, we said, we have a basic intrinsic knowledge of Allah being the Lord, the Creator, the source of everything that exists. Then we get divine knowledge to clarify to us who He is and who He isn't. We need to know who Allah isn't so that we don't focus on other than Allah, thinking that that point of focus is in fact Allah. Similarly, we need to know who Allah is so that we can focus on who He is. So that's the knowledge from Al-Asma wa Sifat. And the prophets, the messengers, they brought this knowledge through the revelations, books of revelations which they brought, and through their own clarifications and explanations. But the actual fruit of Tawheed lies ultimately in the third category, Tawheed al-Ibadah. And it is the main focus of all of the prophets of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They came carrying essentially the message of the third part of Tawheed, that of Tawheed al-Ibadah. That was the essence of their message. But it is also the fruit of the first two. Because if Allah is the creator, and He is unique in being the creator and sustainer, then for us to seek help from other than Him is foolish. Common sense actually tells us that we should be turning to Allah alone. But common sense can sometimes be overridden by intellectual arguments, which may sound convincing if a person doesn't really know who Allah is. For example, somebody might say to you, if you want to get your prayers answered, you want Allah to answer your prayers, then you, who are filthy with sins, cannot turn to Him. He will not hear your prayer. He will not listen to you. You need to find somebody who is close to Him, due to that man's purity, because he has attained a spiritual stage which brings him close to Allah. So if you go through him, your prayers will get to Allah. And they say it's the same thing in this world. You want to see the king or the president, the prime minister, you can't just go down to his home and knock on his door and expect to go in and see him. No. There are too many guards. They're going to stop you. You'll never get there. You have to find somebody, an intermediary who's close to him, who has his ear, and you can talk to him, and your request, your desire will be fulfilled. The person says, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Well, that's if you don't understand that Allah is not like the earthly kings. See, if you don't have that knowledge, Allah tells us in Revelation, "Ud'uni astajib lakum." Call on me and I will answer you. So Allah made it very clear. Don't call on me through anybody else. He didn't say, call on Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and I will answer you. He said, call on me and I will answer you. So He cut out the intermediaries Himself. So if we don't know that, if we don't have that knowledge which Revelation has given us, then we can be fooled by these, logical arguments, seemingly logical arguments. So the messengers came to make the route to Allah clear. You know that He is the Creator. You know that He is unique in that He is the Lord in a unique sense. Then He is the only one who deserves our worship. He is the only one who deserves our worship in all of its aspects. Meaning, our whole lives are supposed to be worship. Expressions of worship. So our whole lives should reflect worship directed towards Allah alone, without any intermediaries between ourselves and Allah. And Allah said in Surah Al-Dhariyat, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. I only created the jinn and human beings for my worship, in order to worship me. Not out of a need which I had, but a need which they have. And He also told the messengers, or told us with regards to the messengers in Surah An-Nahl, 16th chapter, verse 36, وَلَقَدْ بَعَثْنَا فِي كُلِّ أُمَّةٍ رَسُولًا أَنِ اعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ وَاجْتَنِبُوا الطَّاغُوتَ. Indeed, I have sent to every nation a messenger, saying, worship Allah and avoid false gods. So that was the essence of the message of the messengers. The purpose of our creation was worship, and the messenger's job was to ensure that our worship, that we understood that worship is to be directed to Allah alone. So that specifying Allah as being the only source of worship becomes our expression of Tawheed al-Ibadah, or unity of worship. And of course, when we consider worship, we have to consider it in all of its aspects, meaning that worship involves calling on Allah for things that only Allah can do, right? And not calling on any of His creatures for things that only Allah can do. Right? So once we call on Allah, that is itself the essence of worship. When we call on others for things which Allah alone can do, then that becomes worship of those others. The Prophet ﷺ had said, "Ad-du'a huwa al-ibadah." Calling in prayer is worship. It's the essence of worship. So, on one hand, worship in the sense of calling on Allah, calling for help, this should be directed only to Allah. If we direct it to any others, like Abdul Qadir al-Jilani, who in the subcontinent is a popular intermediary, called an wali, a saint, who people call on besides Allah in times of difficulty and trials. He's given the title Ghawsi Azam, the greatest source of help. And people are raised with that belief, that when trials and tribulations strike, you call on Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani and you will be saved. They're raised with that belief. Like the Catholics who call on the various saints for various things. If you lose something, you have a saint called Saint Jude. You call on Saint Jude. If you're traveling, you have a saint for the travelers called Saint Christopher. Unfortunately, in the 60s, the Pope announced that Saint Christopher was fictitious and he was to be crossed off the list of saints. Otherwise, for the millions in the centuries before, they were calling on Saint Christopher, and so on and so forth. They have a saint for virtually everything. A saint for the impossible, a saint for,
Millennium saint.
Huh?
Millennium saint.
Yes, saints for the millennium, etc. Even Mother Teresa is to become a saint for us, right? Anyway, the point is that directing prayers to other than Allah becomes, in fact, worship of them. And also, if we direct trust, though it is not prayer, we're calling on somebody in prayer, but we put our trust in the fullest sense, we put our trust in other than Allah, then in fact we are destroying this element of ibadah, because Allah told us very clearly in the Quran, وَعَلَى اللَّهِ فَتَوَكَّلُوا إِن كُنتُم مُؤْمِنِينَ. Put your trust in Allah if you are truly believers. So the trust should be in Allah. And this is one of the areas where today many people, most of us, fall down in our tawheed. That our trust is not really in Allah. So, when we were faced with situations where on the job our manager, our boss tells us to do something, we know it is not right. We know it involves cheating the customer. What do? Well, we said, we have a family. What am I going to do? I have a family. I have to take care of my family. So, he told me to do it. I had to do it. But we say, no, this isn't right. Prophet ﷺ said, لا طاعة لمخلوق في معصية الخالق. No obedience to the creatures is permissible if it involves disobedience to the Creator. It is impermissible for us to obey Allah's creatures if it involves disobedience to the Creator. Now if somebody puts a gun to your head, that's another situation. Life and death circumstances, you may obey to save your life, as long as that doesn't involve other people losing their lives. Right? Because for you to say, somebody puts a gun to your head and they say, kill so and so, otherwise I'm going to kill you. Oh, no. You can't say, well, I killed him because it's to protect my own life. No. Your doing what is haram has to be limited to yourself. It can't involve other people where you now cause harm to other people in order to prevent harm from coming to yourself. No, not permissible. But where it is just you alone, as in the case of Ammar ibn Yasir, who used to sit with the Prophet ﷺ in his circle studying from him, one day he stopped coming. From that day onwards, the Prophet ﷺ noticed him missing. So he sent some of the companions to find out what happened to him. Perhaps he was sick or whatever. So when they checked with him, they found that he was reluctant. He felt shy to come in the Prophet ﷺ's presence because during torture by his slave master, he expressed words of disbelief. So the Prophet ﷺ called him and asked him what happened. And he said, well, whilst the slave master was trying to force him back into idolatry, and he tortured him and told him to say that his gods were Al-Lat and Al-Uzza, the pagan gods of the Meccans, and that Muhammad ﷺ was a magician and a sorcerer. So he said these things to save his life. The Prophet ﷺ said, when you said these things, was your heart filled with Iman, with faith, or had your faith gone? He said, no, I said it, my heart was filled with faith. He said, well, if they do it to you again, say what you said again. Life and death. Now, Ammar ibn Yasir's father, Yasir, and his mother, Sumayya, they died when they were tortured, rather than say the words of disbelief. His mother was the first martyr in Islam, Sumayya. She was tortured and killed. And she refused to accept the pagan gods back into her life. She refused to say it. And she died. And her husband died. Ammar, when his term came, he said it. Now, what they did, the mother and the father, that is the higher level. It's martyrdom. You gave your life for your faith. But if you are not able, there is a second level where you keep your faith and you say those things which the people demand. It's still a part of faith, and it's acceptable because people are on different levels. If Islam was required for each and every one of us to maintain the level of Sumayya, then religion would become too difficult. And the Prophet ﷺ said, "Ad-Dinu Yusr." The religion is easy. It has the element of ease there, to take into account those who are not on that level. It has that level for those who are up there, but it also has the lower level for those who aren't. So, trust in Allah is broken by many of us in our jobs, work circumstances, etc., where we will engage in haram acts, statements, for the sake of our jobs, because our trust is in our boss, that He is going to pay us at the end of the month. And of course, He might not. It's not absolutely guaranteed. I mean, you have how many cases you see in the newspaper of the boss absconding with the money and leaving all the workers here. They've been working for him for so long, and where's the boss? He's gone. He took all the money and fled. So, there's no guarantee. There's no guarantee. The only guarantee is with Allah. That if Allah makes a promise, His promise is true. Absolutely. The promises of human beings, maybe. Inshallah. Not certain. And that's why we don't put our trust in human beings in that sense. We trust them to a certain level, but our ultimate trust is with Allah. Even with the doctor. When the doctor prescribes medicine, and we take the medicine, if we're taking it believing that the doctor's medicine is going to cure us, then we have put our ultimate trust in the doctor. Our trust should be in Allah that if this is good for me, the medicine will take effect and cure me. But it's with Allah. Because reality is that any medicine, no matter how effective it is, given to a group of people, will work on some and not on others. It may work on most, but still there are always people who you give that same medicine to which cured everybody else and doesn't cure them. So then, who's the curer? The medicine? No. Ultimately, it is Allah. So, even in something so simple as taking medicine, our faith, our ibadah, becomes ruined by the simple act of trusting in our doctors. Ultimately. Of course, you have to trust to a certain point, that, okay, this person got training, You do make decisions in life. You see somebody who is a quack, who obviously doesn't look like he got any kind of training. You see somebody who has certificates, etc. on the wall. Maybe they were fake, but anyway, at least they appear to be okay. So you do put some trust in this individual, and that's natural. There's an element of trust which is natural on a certain level, but we don't put the ultimate trust, in human beings and in what human beings do, etc. We have to keep that trust for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Even the area of love. And these are among the major emotional faculties, areas of high emotion. Love, hate, trust. Love also has its elements, its levels, which are for Allah alone. Ultimately, we should love Allah above all else. And if we love His creatures more than we love Allah, then we are committing shirk in Tawheed al-Ibadah. Our Tawheed al-Ibadah is being destroyed, corroded. And Allah said in Surah Al-Baqarah, وَمِنَ النَّاسِ مَنْ يَتَّخِذُ مِنْ دُونِ اللَّهِ أَنْدَادًا يُحِبُّونَهُمْ كَحُبِّ اللَّهِ وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا أَشَدُّ حُبًّا لِلَّهِ. There are among men those who take for worship others besides Allah as equals to Him. They love them as they should only love Allah. But those who believe have a much greater love for Allah. That is the issue of love, where we, due to our love for our wives, our children, our family, we may engage in things which are displeasing to Allah. So in doing that, this is loving them more than we love Allah. This is loving them more than we love Allah. The family members want to do something which is displeasing to Allah, and we know it's displeasing to Allah. The wife wants something. It costs so much you can't afford it. So she gets you to take a loan. Right? To go and take a loan. Now, the loan may be a halal loan. Right? The loan may be a halal loan. Because you have halal loans and haram loans. Okay? Some people get driven straight into haram loans and they've fallen into haram to please the wife. But there may be a halal loan, meaning that you're getting it from a halal source. But the point is, taking loans when you really don't need to take loans, this in itself is not permissible. Because a loan, when you take a loan, it's like begging. Because that's what you're doing. You're begging somebody to help you out. It's begging. And begging is only allowed for those who are in need. So in other words, you beg for a real need. Your business has fallen apart, your home is gone, burned down, whatever, and you're left on the street. What to do? You know, you can't, you beg people to help you. Okay. For a necessity. But just for a want, because you just like to get, a Suburban. I know you had a Toyota Camry station wagon, but you wanted a Suburban, because it's big and comfortable and, So your wife gets you to take out a loan to get a Suburban when you had a Camry. It's haram, really. You've gone to take something, you're going to take other people's money, for something which you really don't need. Just for a want. And this is what the West propagates on a big scale through the credit cards. Right? You can live beyond your means. So every desire that you have, you've got the card. Go and buy it. Your wife has one, you have one, your kids have one, they just go, shopping. Eventually, it catches up with you. Right? And when it catches up with you, the whole house just falls down. You find whole families in America. You have whole families living in the streets. Just when the cold came, they had like hundreds of people who froze to death in America. Read about them. Who are they? People living in the streets of America. The richest country on the face of the earth. They have hundreds who die every winter, frozen to death in the streets. How did they get into the streets? In many cases, it was credit. They got caught. Ran out, couldn't pay, things were taken away from them. The car, the house, they're out in the street. The man, his wife, and his kids. Living beyond your means. So as Islam tells us to live within your means. Be patient. Work. If you work, you save, you want to get a bit more, fine. Because this is within your means. Islam doesn't say you can't live a luxurious life. If you have the money to buy a Suburban, fine. Islam doesn't say Suburbans are haram. This is only... No. Suburbans are halal. You can buy a Suburban. If you have the means to buy the Suburban. But if you don't have the means, then for you to put yourself in debt to get these things, this is not halal, really. And Prophet ﷺ has said, among the things which will stop people from going into paradise is debts. That a martyr, one who actually dies in the battlefield from martyrdom, will be held at the gates of paradise because of his debts. So serious. In other words, he stressed it. So a person who begs, who has no real need for begging, will come before Allah with no skin on his face. He'll come before Allah with no skin on his face. So, these are, areas where love can drive us into the haram, into the forbidden, to the disliked, because our love of creatures is greater than our love of Allah. And finally, in the area about which questions were raised, what we called hakimiyya, in the area of government, where we know that ultimately the laws should come from Allah. Allah is the legislator. So when we choose legislation in fundamental areas which are not from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we make up our own legislation. In fact, this becomes a form of shirk in Tawheed al-Ibadah. It is that serious. And this is something much of the Muslim world today has fallen into, where the laws of Allah do not govern the lives of the Muslims. The vast majority of Muslim countries are following laws other than the laws of Allah. So this is a big trial on the Ummah. And we know that it is a form of shirk because on one occasion, one of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, Adi ibn Hatim, who had recently converted from Christianity, he heard the Prophet ﷺ recite the verse in reference to the Christians and the Jews, اتَّخَذُوا أَحْبَارَهُمْ وَرُهْبَانَهُمْ أَرْبَابًا مِنْ دُونِ اللَّهِ. They have taken their rabbis and monks as lords besides Allah. They've taken their rabbis and monks as lords besides Allah. So Adi said to the Prophet ﷺ, that's not true actually, we didn't worship these people. As a Christian, he didn't worship the monks. But the Prophet ﷺ said, did they make forbidden what Allah made allowable, and make allowable what Allah forbade, and you followed them? He said, yes, we did that. The Prophet ﷺ said, that was your worship of them. That's how you worship them. If they made halal permissible what Allah forbade, pork for example, they made it halal, Allah forbade it. Or they made haram what Allah made halal, marriage for example for priests to get married. They made it haram for them, not allowed to get married. Following that is a form of worship. So that's on a basic level with regards to religious practices, but that can be extrapolated to a world scale, a society, a community scale, where the community accepts legislation which is against or in contradiction to not following the laws of Allah. So where in Muslim countries, for example, today, they ban polygamy. You have some Muslim countries where it's not allowed. Tunisia, etc. It's not permissible. This becomes a form of shirk in Tawheed al-Ibadah. Or in Muslim countries where the country, as part of its products, produces alcohol, and legislates that it is okay to consume it and to produce it. This is making halal what Allah made haram. So in various aspects of governance today, Muslim societies have strayed away from the teachings. When people talk about Tawheed al-Hakimiyyah, this is what they're talking about. But this element, as you can see, it's a part of Tawheed al-Ibadah. It has to do with the worship of Allah. We worship Him through obedience to His laws. So when we obey other laws other than His laws, and these are in the areas where there are fundamental laws, then it becomes worship of other than Allah. Now there are levels of laws, legal levels, which are secondary and tertiary laws, where a country may make it, and you can say, well, okay, the law states that children must go to school, or the law states that when you reach a stoplight, you must stop. Person could say, well, where's that in the hadith? Where's that in the Quran? Well, yeah, it's not in the hadith of the Quran, but what is there, is a general instruction where Allah says, that you should obey أطيعوا الله وأطيعوا الرسول وأولي الأمر منكم. Obey Allah and obey the Messenger and those in authority over you. So those who have been put in authority over you, who are governing according to the laws of Allah, if they make secondary laws in order to protect the society from harm, then we are obliged to follow those laws also. That covers basically our introduction to Tawheed and its elements. Just reminding you that Tawheed means maintaining the unity of Allah in all of our actions, our thoughts, our worship, in everything that we do. And especially in those things which are directed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We should be trying to make everything we do somehow directed to Him. But at least in those things clearly directed to Him, that unity must be maintained. And those things which we haven't directed to Him, the issue of unity of Allah may not obviously arise in our eyes, but in the end, in a subtle way, it's there. And we should strive to look into all of the things that we do. The clothes that we wear, how we wear our clothes, because fashion is the thing which we tend to be caught up in. A person may say, well, how does fashion become ibadah? Well, the Prophet ﷺ said, Man tashabbaha biqawmin fahuwa minhum. Whoever imitates a people is of them. So it means that if we dress in a way which is unique to the disbelievers, then this becomes a form of disobedience to Allah, because the Prophet ﷺ warned us to not be like the disbelievers. We should distinguish ourselves from the disbelievers. So in that way, it is a subtle way. It's not obvious. It's not prostrating, making sacrifice. That's obvious. But this is a much more subtle way, in the way we dress, in the way, the lifestyles that we live, how we organize our homes, how we, deal with our children. There's so many different ways that we may not understand or we may not see in them ibadah, but in fact, there are elements of ibadah or worship in every single thing that we do. And that is the beauty of Islam, that it covers everything that we do. There is guidance for us in everything we can even think about. There is guidance. It's in the Quran, and it was lived in the Sunnah. We completed the chapter on the categories of Tawheed, the first chapter. Before going on to the second chapter in this session, there are some questions which were raised from the women's side. And if you have any questions, this is also an opportunity to to look at those questions before we go into the second chapter. First question, how do we distinguish this level of love for a person? Actually, the question is unclear. If we're talking about love of a person which has reached the level of shirk, we know it by obedience. This is what determines for us what is the level which is unacceptable, where it causes a person to disobey Allah in order to please other human beings. So that is the level of love for Allah's creatures, which becomes a form of shirk in Tawheed. And this was in Tawheed al-Ibadah. The second question, if there are different levels of faith that are acceptable, some not as strong as others, is this then how these people would fall into haram? Or is it that they are just not striving? Obviously, the stronger a person's faith is, the less likely that the individual is to fall into haram. That's normal. We can say that per person whose faith is weak, then he or she would be falling into haram on a regular basis. So, falling into haram is related to the level of faith. The stronger one's faith, the stronger one is obedient to Allah, because the essence of faith is obedience to Allah. So therefore the weaker one's faith is the greater the disobedience, because disbelief, disobedience is all related to a weakness of faith which would not allow that person to restrain himself from disobedience to Allah. Third question, if we are able to follow a country's law as long as they do not contradict Allah's law, does this mean we cannot live in the West since much of their way or their laws contradicts Allah's laws? No, this doesn't mean that it's not possible to live in the West. If a person lives under a system which is an un-Islamic system, then there is going to be at some point a compromise, no doubt. The idea is that one doesn't compromise so much of the Islamic principles that in fact, their lives are lives of disobedience. That's the idea. It is minimized. If one finds that it isn't possible to practice the basic principles of Islam, then it means that one should not be living in that country. This is where hijrah or emigration becomes obligatory on the individual. And the Prophet ﷺ had said emigration or hijrah remains until the last day. So wherever a person is compromised religiously to a degree that the basic principles of Islam can't be practiced, then that person, if they're able, must make hijrah. They must leave that country.
If they are not, if they're not able, then how are they supposed to live the life then?
The brother's question, if a person is unable to make the hijrah, how do they live their lives in the country? Well, what they try to do is to at least gather with other Muslims to try to form a community in that land in which they are. Right? Which will minimize the impact of the non-Islamic society on them. For example, if we look at India as an example, where to tell the vast majority of Indian Muslims to make hijrah out of India is just not practical. Right? Besides not wanting to, it just wouldn't be possible. But what we would say for Muslims in India is that they should live together. They should create communities where they are congregated. Then the impact, the negative impact from the non-Muslim society is minimized. Places like Hyderabad, where you have, virtually 100% Muslim areas. The Islamic atmosphere is still there quite strongly, and they're not, the impact of Hindu society on them is much less. Places like Kerala, where Muslims again are in large proportions, again, the impact is much less. But in other areas, in Gujarat and other places where Muslims are fewer and they're mixed up and living amongst non-Muslims, whenever any incidents occur in the country, which are politically inflamed, then those people suffer. how many cases of people being burned to death, rapes, and all these other kinds of things happening. But mostly these are in areas where Muslims are few and scattered. Where they are concentrated and many, then that type of incident is minimized. The fourth question, could you clarify what you mean by the following? Does this mean by living in that country, Europe for example, are we following them since we have to abide by the laws of the country? Well, this is an extension of the previous question. As I said, to the degree that those laws make us compromise our Islam, that's the degree to which we end up following them. You know, I would say that in most countries, the majority of the laws of the country will agree with Islamic law. Because what Islam calls to is not in and of itself something unknown to human society. What Islam calls to, Allah calls in the Quran, al-ma'ruf, that which is known. Known good by societies wherever you go. And most societies will build their laws on what is known to be good. So the likelihood of contradiction between the general laws of the society and Islamic laws is small. Usually these come into more social areas, burial practices, inheritance laws, and certain other things. In these areas, then Muslims strive to try to assert themselves in the country, if their numbers are sufficient, that their laws also be recognized. For example, in India, probably Muslims are able to follow, elements or aspects of Islamic law they can't follow in many Muslim countries. There are actually Muslim countries where they can't follow these laws. In Turkey, for example, where, women are not allowed to wear scarves in any governmental position or teaching and all this, this is a Muslim country. But Muslims in India are able to wear scarves. It's not, the society has not prevented them from doing so. So, as I said, the general laws will not contradict Islamic laws, but in certain other areas, maybe in marriage laws, divorce laws, these other kinds of systems where the country may oblige Muslims to follow them. In such a case, then the Muslim is obliged to follow those laws. If he or she wants to practice laws these laws according to Islamic law, and they can't do so in the place they are, then again we're back to the issue of hijrah, emigration. Or if there are loopholes in the law, for example, say in North America, in the U.S., polygamy is illegal. Polygamy is called bigamy. It's a crime and you're put in jail for it. If a man has a girlfriend along with his wife, no problem. But if he takes another wife along with his wife, then there's a problem. Okay? So that is their system. This really goes against common sense, etc. But that is their system. So what does a Muslim do there? Well, it is possible for him to take a second wife, but not register it officially. If it's registered officially, then it becomes polygamy or bigamy, a crime. If in the Muslim community it's known, this is a marriage, etc., etc., but in the non-Muslim community, this is his girlfriend, okay, fine. That's the point of compromise that you make, in that kind of circumstance. You don't go against the law because, again, you're bringing down problems on yourself and on the society. You stay within the bounds where they have loopholes. That is their loophole. You can have as many girlfriends as you want, just don't call them wives. That's the loophole that they have. So you function, within the bounds that they have set. Last question. What is the hadith or Quranic verse which speaks about if a person follows a law other than Allah's law? It is وَمَنْ لَمْ يَحْكُمْ بِمَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْكَافِرُونَ. Whoever does not judge by what Allah has revealed is a disbeliever. This is Surah Al-Ma'idah, verse 44. That's chapter 5, verse 44. But you should note that before that, Allah says, whoever doesn't judge by other than Allah's law is a corrupt individual. Two other phrases were used to those who don't judge by Allah's law. So it doesn't mean simply if one doesn't judge by Allah's law, automatically you become a disbeliever. And this is looked at, again, as an act of disbelief, that you may be doing an act of disbelief, but it doesn't mean that you yourself are a disbeliever. You are like the disbelievers in the sense that you're following laws other than Allah's laws, but we don't declare that person to be a disbeliever unless he or she openly declares themselves to be disbelievers.